Welcome back to Odds of War. I'm Matt, and today we're doing another video in our Art of Wargaming series, and we're going to announce the winner of our 1,000 subscriber giveaway. So a little bit later in the video, we're going to announce our winner of our 1,000 subscriber giveaway, so stay tuned for that. But for now, we're doing Art of Wargaming. So this is the third video in the series. If you haven't seen the first two, go back and check those out. That way you can sort of get a feel for what we're doing, what we're going for here. But a quick rundown. Basically, we're taking Sun Tzu's Art of War. We're going to go through chapter by chapter and sort of just explore the ideas presented into it and how can we apply it to the world of tabletop wargaming. So chapter 3 here is Attack by Stratagem. So it's about 2 pages worth of verses. So another short chapter here by Sun Tzu. So let's just dig right in and see what we can find. Starting in verse 1, Sun Tzu said, "In the practical art of war, the best thing of all is to take the enemy's country whole and intact. To shatter and destroy it is not so good. So too, it is better to recapture an army entire than to destroy it, to capture a regiment, a detachment, or a company entire than to destroy them." So right off the bat, we're already exploring the idea it's better to capture than it is to destroy. So the very first high-level thing we can sort of glean from this is that on the tabletop, it's better to be playing a higher level game than just destroying your opponent. Sure, of course, there's tons of fun to be had in just raw, like smashing your opponent, but really your goal should be playing the mission. Any game you're playing is there's a win condition, whether that is scoring points, capturing objectives, holding territory, that sort of stuff. Those are your win conditions. Every once in a while, of course, you'll have a game or a mission or what have you that is just destroy your opponent. But even then, there's a way to go about it that is best. So I think that's sort of the first idea presented here by Sun Tzu. Hence, to fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. So again, just sort of reinforcing that it's better to win the game without just utterly destroying your opponent, but rather to play the mission. And actually, I think this sort of goes both in the highest level tactical gameplay is found not in just raw destroying your opponent, but in forcing your game plan on the table, playing to the mission. And also in terms of there is a social contract at the game table of like, we're going to come together and we're going to try to have a good time and have fun. And if you're just bloodthirsty, going out, smashing your opponent to bits with something that is so much better and so much more aggressive than your opponent, then that's not necessarily going to be fun for your opponent. And so both supreme excellence can be found in not just removing your opponent's ability to play the game, both in the tactical side and also in the social contract side. Thus, the highest form of generalship is to balk the enemy's plan. The next best is to prevent the junction of the enemy's forces. The next in order is to attack the enemy's army in the field. And the worst policy of all is to besiege walled cities. The highest form of generalship is to balk the enemy's plans. So that's sort of looking at your opponent, looking at your opponent's force and saying, what does this force, what does this general want to do? So going back to some of the previous videos and some of the previous chapters we've explored at this point, in laying plans, which is chapter 1, there were these 5 constant factors that can help you predict who will win the battle, so to speak. And number 2 is heaven, and number 4 is the commander. And we likened those to sort of what an army is, the heaven being the high-level meta of the matchup, and the commander, of course, being yourself and how you like to play, your opponent and how they like to play. Okay, so the highest form of generalship is to balk the enemy's plans. So you go back to those 5 constant factors and say, okay, so according to heaven, the meta of this matchup, how does my opponent want to play the game? And then the commander, how does my opponent not in their necessarily their army style, but they themselves, how do they like to play offensive, defensive, that sort of thing. So the highest level of generalship is to balk the enemy's plans. So when you go, okay, my opponent's force is a very shooting focused force. Okay, the highest level of generalship is to not let them shoot at you. My commander that I'm going against, they like to play very aggressive and shooting, or very shooting and defensive. Well, I don't want to let them shoot at me, and then I want to stop them from playing their preferred way. So the next best is to prevent the junction of the enemy's forces. That's if we can split their force in multiple pieces, keep them away from each other, keep them from all shooting or all fighting one position, keep them fragmented. The next in order is to attack the enemy's army in the field. That's sort of now you no longer have the advantage. So if you can't stop their plans, so they've gotten to play the way they want, and you can't split up their army, then you must meet them head on. And the worst policy of all is to besieged walled cities. So now not even meeting them head on works. You have to sort of fall back because you don't want to play into their hand. That's sort of besieging walled cities, is playing into your opponent's game plan, and that's the worst plan of all. Moving on to verse 4, the rule is not to besiege walled cities if it can possibly be avoided. The general, unable to control his irritation, will launch his men to the assault like swarming ants, with the result that 1/3 of his men are slain while the town still remains untaken. Such are the disastrous effects of a siege. So that's really exploring that last point of like the worst idea is to play into your opponent's game plan. The rule is not to besiege walled cities. The rule is don't play into your enemy's game plan. Just don't do it. Once you've figured out what your opponent wants to do, what your opponent's force wants to be doing, melee, fighting, a mix of both. Does it play by holding objectives? Does it play by just removing your models and then going out, that sort of thing? And then how does your commander, your enemy commander, like to play? Do they like to play offensive, defensive, mix of both, board control, alpha strike, beta strike, that sort of stuff? The rule is don't play into it. Find a way to subvert it, because if you are playing into it, right, the general, unable to control his irritation, it's not going to go well for you. So don't play into it. Will launch his men to the assault like swarming ants. You're just throwing your game pieces away. That's all you'll be doing. If you're playing into your opponent's hand, you're just throwing your pieces away for a futile attempt, because 1/3 of your men will be slain. 1/3 or more even of your game pieces will be removed, and the town, your enemy's force, your enemy's game plan, will remain untaken. Such are the disastrous effects of a siege. Such are the disastrous effects of playing into your enemy's hand. Therefore, the skillful leader subdues the enemy's troops without any fighting. He captures their cities without laying siege to them. He overthrows their kingdom without lengthy operations in the field. So, much like we explored in episode 2, which was waging war, we talked about stupid haste in war and how cleverness has never been associated with long delays. So, your first and primary thing to attack by stratagem, figure out your enemy's game plan, both what their force wants to do and what the player, your enemy player, wants to do, and you must subdue it with as little fighting as possible. So render their tools ineffective, right? Get out of line of sight if they want to be shooting, or get in cover, that sort of thing. Or if they want to be in melee, to stay away. He captures their cities without laying siege to them, right? We talked about siege, laying siege to a walled city is playing into your opponent's hand. So you play the game opposite to what they want to do. You don't let them play. And then he overthrows their kingdom without lengthy operations in the field. You do it quickly. You do it as quick as possible without overextending your force. With his forces intact, he will dispute the mastery of the empire, and thus, without losing a man, his triumph will be complete. This is the method of attacking by stratagem. So this is in the realm of deployment and the beginning of the game. You're going to deploy and get yourself set up in such a way as to immediately subvert your enemy's game plan, because before you've ever set down pieces on the board, you've already figured out how to break their force. Verse 8, it is the rule in war, if our forces are 10 to the enemy's 1, to surround him. If 5 to 1, attack him. If twice as numerous, to divide our army into 2. We can look at this both literally and sort of figuratively. Literally, you might, have as many game pieces as they do, right? So you might have 10 to 1, so you might have an overwhelming number is advantage. You might be 5 to 1, you might have an advantage, but not, huge. Or if twice as numerous, so you might have just a 2 to 1 advantage. So we can follow that literally. If forces are 10 to 1, surround him. So you're playing board control. You're playing a very control-oriented game and not about killing. If 5 to 1 attack, so if you only have 5 to 1 advantage, you're going to push and attack your opponent to keep that advantage. If twice as numerous, divide our army into 2. So if you only have 2 to 1, then you split into 2 forces, each equal to your opponents, and force them to fight on 2 fronts, so to speak. Now we can also look at that not literally as in number of game pieces, but figuratively, and think about the strength of the force, right? So if the strength of your force, not necessarily number of game pieces, but perhaps damage output or board control aspect, if you are 10 to enemy's 1, so if you are much more damaging than your opponent's force, then you're going to surround them, make it so that they can't move. If you are 5 to 1, so you're a little more damaging, but not overwhelmingly so, then you just press to push the advantage. And if twice as numerous, so just a 2 to 1 sort of strength advantage, then you're going to make 2 forces with about a 1 to 1 strength advantage. If equally matched, we can offer battle. If slightly inferior in numbers, we can avoid the enemy. If quite unequal in every way, we can flee from him. So that, of course, sort of explores that level of instead of you being the superior force, you're now the inferior force. So if you're equally matched, you can fight it out and hope that the numbers, the sort of die rolls and odds and averages come out in your favor. If slightly inferior in numbers, we can avoid the enemy. So that's sort of the think the 300 Spartans, right, at Thermopylae. You avoid the enemy, and you pick the engagement that you want to take that you can win, thus to hopefully rout the enemy and make a stand. If quite unequal in every way, we can flee from him. So that's where you go, okay, I am getting destroyed, I am getting routed, so I have to focus solely on trying to win the mission and avoid as much loss as possible. Hence, though an obstinate fight may be made by a small force, in the end, it must be captured by the larger force. We have to be realistic. We have to understand when a game has been won, when a game has been lost. If you are the small force, an obstinate fight may be made, but you've probably already lost, and in the end, you must be captured by the larger force. So we're going to skip verse 11 because it's not super applicable, and we're going to go straight to verse 12. There are 3 ways in which a ruler can bring misfortune upon his army. Number 1, by commanding the army to advance or to retreat, being ignorant of the fact that it cannot obey. This is called hobbling the army. 2, by attempting to govern an army in the same way as he administers a kingdom, being ignorant of the conditions which obtain in an army. This causes restlessness in the soldiers' minds. Number 3, by employing the officers of his army without discrimination through ignorance of the military principle of adaptation to circumstances. This shakes the confidence of the soldiers, right? 3 ways in which a player can mess up on the table, right? In which a ruler, the player, can bring misfortune upon his army, bring failure, so to speak. Number 1, command the army to advance or retreat, being ignorant of the fact that it cannot obey. That is trying maneuvers that your army just can't do. So by commanding the army to advance or retreat, being ignorant of the fact that it cannot obey, that's like taking your force and expecting it to do something that it just can't, or pushing them into a situation with very low odds of success. 2, by attempting to govern an army in the same way as he administers a kingdom, being ignorant of the conditions which obtain in an army. So I like to think of this sort of as like, if you're like me, you probably play multiple game types, multiple armies or forces. And so this is sort of like playing one army like you would play another, even though they're not the same. They have different rules. They have different win conditions. They have different ways that they're successful. If you govern an army, if you play a force in the same way as he administers a kingdom, in the same way that you play another force, you're not going to be successful because each force is distinct and has its own way of playing, has its own way of succeeding, that you need to be playing into that. And number 3, by employing the officers of his army without discrimination through ignorance of the military principle of adaptation to circumstances. So a lot of characters, a lot of models, a lot of rules, they have things like auras or reaches or a certain number of things that they can affect. This number 3 is using them without discrimination. So using them, just playing them, not being mindful of their auras, not being mindful of their effects, not being mindful of the reason that they're there. By doing so, you throw away the advantage that they give you. All right, so at this point, I think it's good. We're going to take a little break from Art of Wargaming. We only have a little bit left in the chapter, and we're going to finish that up after this. But I thought now would be a good time to discuss the winner of the 1,000 subscriber giveaway. So we made a little thank you video at 1,000 subscribers. We showed what was up for grabs. We asked you guys just to comment on the video, be a subscriber, comment on the video, what you liked, what you want to see, that sort of stuff, feedback. We got a really good response. So thank you everybody for your responses. Thank you for your feedback. We've taken them into account. We're trying to factor in more of that, trying to give you more of the content that you guys are looking for, and make some improvements where you guys gave us some constructive feedback. So I randomly picked the winner, the commenter from a commonpicker.com, just so you guys, full disclosure, and it just randomly picks a comment. So I went ahead and I put in the YouTube URL. It picked a random winner for the giveaway. And that winner is Roy Finesse. Sorry if I've said that. Maybe it's Finesse, F-E-N-E-S-S. Anyway, Roy, you've won. Thank you so much for, being a subscriber, a watcher, a commenter, all that stuff. You've of course won the Tau Kill team, the core rulebook, and all the various accoutrements, which we said in that video. I'll comment on your comment on that video, letting you know you've won, and get in touch with me, and we'll work out the details for how to ship you your winnings. So congratulations, Roy, and stay tuned. In the future, we'll probably be doing more giveaways as we hit more milestones. All right, and so now finishing up with Art of Wargaming, the last thing, last sort of bits, we've got 2 more verses to explore, 17 and 18. 17, thus we may know that there are 5 essentials for victory. 1, he will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. So when to take the fight to your opponent, when to play defensively, when to play the mission versus going all out aggressive. 2, he will win who knows how to handle both superior and inferior forces. So being able to make that hard call at the table of going, I'm on the losing side, so let me pull back, play defensive, play to the mission. Or I'm on the winning side, let me press the advantage but not overextend. 3, he will win whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout all its ranks. I like to think of that as he who sort of knows his force, knows his army, knows what it can and can't do. 4, he will win who prepared himself, waits to take the enemy unprepared. That goes back to sort of what we talked about of knowing the enemy's game plan, knowing what they want to do and bulking it, and knowing your game plan and knowing what you want to do and knowing when to spring your plan into action. And number 5, he will win who has military capacity is not interfered with by the sovereign. So in this example, I like to think of this as the sovereign is the rules. So knowing who, like he who has military capacity, knowing what you want to do, and is not interfered with by the sovereign, you're playing by the rules. Victory lies in the knowledge of these 5 points. Hence the saying, and I think this is sort of the maybe the theme of this entire series, this entire Art of Wargaming series. Hence the saying, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So that's really the sort of theme of this entire Art of Wargaming series, is knowing yourself and knowing your opponent. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoy making these videos, so we hope that you enjoy them as well. If you did, make sure to hit that like button and let us know down in the comments what you think about Art of War and how it can apply to the tabletop. And if you want to support us here at Odds of War, we've got a lot of ways to do so. You can explore those options down in the description below, but the easiest way to do so is, of course, just making sure that you are subscribed. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Bye.